see young families here, people with children. I think tonight you're going to get quite an education about the problem behind the fluoride, what would you call it, propaganda that we've been subjected to for over 60 years. I'd just like to start by saying that fluoride substances are a deadly poison. Most of you don't know this. Especially the kind of fluoride that they put in our drinking water. It's called hydrofluorosilicic acid in Ottawa. And it's one of the worst ones. It comes from the pollution results that come out of the flue stacks that they scrub down so it doesn't go into the atmosphere, doesn't go into rivers, doesn't go into lakes, because it's a pollutant. And yet we're drinking it in our water. Anybody who's amazed with that is because we are not kept informed of what's happening. Believe it or not, the people who operate the fluoridating equipment don't like to do it. But they have a job, they have a family, so they do it. When swallowed in quantities in excess of 100 grams at one time, fluoride products will kill you. That's proven fact. People have died for less. Little children, 50 grams have killed children. Fluoridation is forced medication without oversight by any doctor. Do you know of any doctor who's ever told you, oh, I'm going to prescribe this for you, you can take it for the rest of your life as much as you want it? Fluoride in our water is medication. It's to help fix, presumably, our teeth by swallowing it. Well, you're going to find out tonight why it doesn't work and what you can do about it. Long-term ingestion of small quantities of fluoride substances will have a cumulative effect on your health and well-being, even in concentrations as small as 0.1 milligrams per liter. Now, I have a little demonstration I'd like to do, if I can find my bag. Right here.
We're already on the list.
I'd like to have 3 volunteers come up front. Can I have 3 volunteers? Now, how many sticks do you have? 10. That represents 1 milligram of fluoride. How many have you got? 7. 0.7 milligrams. You got 1. 0.1 milligrams. Now, if I had a match, and these were in the fairy tale land of fluoridation, if these were sticks of dynamite, and I lighted each one of these, who would throw it away and run away? Would you keep holding those? I don't think so, eh? Even 1? No. Because you'd die if it was to go off. Fluoride is the same thing. It doesn't matter the quantity, because the concentration in the water doesn't matter. It's how much you drink of it, which means the dosage that you take is what's going to affect you. Athletes can drink gallons a day. Little babies will drink it in the formula that you feed them, because it's in the water. And that's a problem, as you will see. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think you get the picture, you know? It's dynamite. Fluoride is like dynamite. It'll kill you, eventually. Earlier than you want to die. We have 2 presenters tonight. Gilles Parent, who comes to us from the province of Beck, and is bilingual. The city...
I don't speak a word in English. I'm very sorry.
And coming from Canton, Canton, New York. Stand up, please. Dr. Paul Connett, with a PhD chemistry. And Dr. Connett is the director of the Fluoride Action Network, and he is now, his website, or the website set up by his family basically, especially Michael Connett.
Especially my wife, Ellen.
And his wife, Ellen. Thank you very much, sorry. It's known internationally. You can get all kinds of information from that website, and it's called fluoridealert.org. Our own website in Ottawa, we have one for those who don't know, is ffo-olf.org. Very simple. Fluoride Free Ottawa - Ottawa Libre de Fluoration. Okay? So if you want to check our website, it's there. I didn't have enough time today to print the second page of the handout. It's on there. But go to the website. You'll have all the information plus a link to the FAN website and links to all kinds of other things and other websites that promote the fight against fluoride. Gilles?
Thank you, Richard. The biggest question that we have to ask are fluoridation chemicals, the product that we put in the water, are they regulated? And in fact, they're unregulated, untested, unapproved, illegal drugs. I'm the co-author of Fluoridation, Autopsy of a Scientific Error. Oops. So you could find this book, or you could order it. At the end of the presentation, you're going to have the address where you can order it. And Paul also have written a very good book, so it's up there, so you should have the chance to read it too. Why do we add fluoride to the water? Why fluoridation? And everybody will answer me rapidly. Anyone have an answer?
Prevent tooth decay.
And alleviate dental cavities. Everybody knows that. The claim purpose defines the nature of a product and application of laws pertinent to it. If we add something for treating you to prevent you from having dental decay, it's because it has a function. And by the law, if it's a drug, it will be in certain type of laws. If it's a nutrient, it will be another type of law. If it is a water additive, it will be controlled by other types of law. Now, in what law is those compound put in? So the claim purpose of fluoridation is to prevent dental cavities or to make drinking water safe and potable or drinkable. Why do we add the fluoride in the water? They always tell you it's to prevent dental cavities, not to make the water safe and drinkable. So fluoride chemicals have 5 or 6 possible, I could say, definition. It could be a drug. It could be a natural health product. It could be a mineral nutrients for food fortification, like the iodine that we add to the salt. It could be a food additive. It could be a water treating chemical. Or it could be a hazardous waste. In which one would you put it? In what compartment does the government put it in? Do you have an answer? I would like to find one. Product making specific health claims, like preventing cavities, are defined in the law as either a drug or a natural health product. If they're one or the other, they must then comply with strict regulation. You don't put anything as a drug. You have to have tests and control and toxicology tests on those products and having human tests and things like that and see if it's valuable or not. If they're claiming only good for health, you cannot say in that condition it's other function than good for health. Then it could be beside being a drug or a natural health product. It could be a mineral nutrients for food fortification. But when it's added as a food fortification agent, you cannot say it's good against tooth decay. It will be illegal to do so. If good for health, they must be prepared and stored in hygienic condition, and they have to have toxicological tests on it. Are they? No. We have sent many petitions. A petition is a process where we send questions to the government with the Auditor General, and the government had to answer those questions. And we have asked a series of questions. We have allowed to have 20 questions, and each time we have sent a petition. We have sent about something like 30 petitions altogether in Quebec and the federal government. It's very nice to check how fluoride chemicals are defined. the Supreme Court of Canada in 1957, they have stated in the judgment, fluoridation is a compulsory preventive medication. It's not to promote the ordinary use of water as a physical requisite for the body. It has a special health purpose. And this ruling by the judge, which was in the judgment Metropolitan in Toronto against the city of Forest Hill in 1957, this ruling have never been contested by the Canadian government. So what the Supreme Court says normally makes the law. Are they controlled or approved by Health Canada as drugs or natural health product? No. We have asked the question and the government say no, it's absolutely not a drug when it's added to the water. If it's added in tablets, it's a drug or a natural health product. But if it's in the water with the same purpose, it's not a drug. It's not a natural health product. Okay. Then what is it? Are these fluoridation chemicals approved by Health Canada as mineral nutrients for water fortification? Because if you add in the bottle of water, like nursing baby water, if you have the fluoride in the water, then it's not a drug, it's not a natural health product, then it will be a mineral nutrients for water fortification. Though, we have a problem. In the law, the product has to be prepared in certain type of condition. Are they approved, like the fluorosilicate they add to the water, or hydrosilicic acid they add to the water, is it approved by Health Canada? No. Whoops, we have a problem again. Are these fluoridation chemicals approved by Health Canada as food additive? We have asked the question. Health Canada told us there is absolutely no fluoride compound that is permissible or permissible as food additive. It's illegal. None of them have been recognized. And this have been in the answer of petition 299, answer number 1. Does Health Canada exert any surveillance on fluoridation product? Oh, as it's not a drug, as it's not a natural health product, as it's not a nutrient, a food additive, then Health Canada does not make any surveillance on it. Whoa. And this again was in the answer, number 1, by Health Canada to the Auditor General. And you could find that on the internet. If you go to the Auditor General petitions, and you could find all those petitions and all those answers, and are in French or in English. Then what are fluoridation chemicals? Fluoridation chemicals are unprocessed scrubbler liquor from the phosphate industry smokestack emission. That's where it comes from. If these emissions are released in the atmosphere, there are air pollutants. If these emissions are released in the river, there are water pollutants. When the same chemicals, exactly the same, are added to the municipality water, they are changed by a very special miracle into a beneficial nutrient good for your teeth and your health. This is quite surprising. Fluoridation chemicals are recycled toxic waste, and it comes with small quantity of arsenic, lead, chromium, mercury, and radioactive nucleotide, and this comes with without any extra charges. They come with that free, and it's a fairly good amount. So untested, uncontrolled, unregulated chemical waste taken directly from the industry, from the reservoir, from the industry, and it's dripped into your drinking water. Do you think they're pharmaceutical grade? No, they're not pharmaceutical grade. They're not food grade, but industrial grade fluoride. Are fluoridation product natural? No, they don't exist in nature. They're man-made. Are fluoride compound water treatment chemical used to make drinking water safe? No. The aim is not to treat the water to make it safe or drinkable. Their aim is to treat cavities in people. That's the only reason they add fluoride to the water. It's to treat against dental decay. And we'll see if it's effective or not. Are the fluoridation chemicals complying with standard 60 of the National Sanitation Foundation? The National Sanitation Foundation are the chemical companies that prepare like the chlorine that they add to the water to treat the water to make it drinkable, or to make it clear and look good and like fresh water. No. They have an NSF certificate, a National Sanitation Foundation certificate, but do not meet all the requirements of the National Sanitation Foundation Standard 60. And this is very serious affirmation. One essential requirement for the National Sanitation Foundation Standard 60 is chronic toxicological test that demonstrates safety of the product. Chronic doesn't mean that you get a chronic disease. Chronic means a long-term effect. So they must have chronic toxicology tests made on 30 years or 20 years. How many of those tests have been done, do you think? Are there any chronic toxicology tests available for fluorosilicate? No. NSF fact sheet states that toxicological testing is required, but you won't find anywhere within the review of the federal government in the states or the U.S. EPA or the safety data sheet states that they're not available. And you could see, for example, sodium fluorosilicate material safety sheets, and this comes from the MSDS, one of the big supplier. Toxicological information, acute toxicity, inhalation, no data available. It will kill rats very easily with 125 milligrams, and rats are 10 times more resistant to fluoride than human beings. And we're just talking about 125 milligrams by kilogram. Is there any dermal test? No data available. For skin irritation or breathing irritation, no data available. Sensitization, no data available. Comments, no data available. Chronic toxicity, and this is the most important. You have to have those tests done. If there's no test done, the product is not standard 60 and it cannot be added to the water. No data available. That means there's no test done. Carcinogenic designation, there's none yet. They didn't do enough tests to tell you. But some of the researcher, and we stated in our book, Fluoridation, Autopsy of the Scientific Error, there's a huge amount of demonstration that fluoride compounds cause cancer. Letter from the U.S. Congressman hearing, the U.S. EPA, the National Institute of Environmental Health Science, 2001, that we cited just a few minutes ago, review, state that fluoridation products do not have toxicology studies. Therefore, they have not been proven safe. But the federal government tells us it's safe and effective. The provincial government, the public health, tells us it's safe and effective. But there's no toxicological test. Cannot be proven safe automatically. And this is serious. If fluoridation chemicals do not have long-term toxicological study, then safety cannot be demonstrated. They are not proven safe. Therefore, they do not satisfy the National Sanitation Foundation Standard 60. Therefore, they're not complying with the Quebec and Ontario law. The Ontario Safe Drinking Water Act tells you that they have to be compliant with Standard 60, and they're not, because there's no toxicology test done. Wow. Finally, what are fluoridation chemicals? If they're not drugs, if they're not natural health products, if they're not mineral nutrients for food fortification, if they're not food additive, if not water treatment chemicals, they must be hazardous waste. Fluoridation chemicals satisfy all criteria for hazardous and toxic waste. You could see the ruling in Quebec or the Canada export and import hazardous waste and hazardous recycled material regulation. They tell you if it contains more than 150 milligrams by kilograms, it's a toxic waste. If it contains lead more than 5 ppm, or if it contains arsenic more than 5 ppm, they contain about 50 ppm of lead in it, then automatically it's a toxic waste. And that's what they're putting in your water. And that's serious. MSD fluoride supplier data sheet demonstrate little knowledge of fluoridation chemicals on the environment. Ecological information, mobility, no data available. Ecotoxicity, no data available. Bioaccumulation, no data available. Do you know that you're guinea pigs? Persistent and degradability, no data available. Further information, highly toxic for foliage. If it's bad for the plant, it must be bad for you too. And it's legal at 50 ppm. That's not very much far away from what we're drinking in the water. Canadian Environment Protection Act, toxic substance. They say if they contain lead or mercury or inorganic arsenic, and it contains arsenic, radioactive substance, or inorganic fluoride, they all listed as toxic substance in Canada Environmental Protection Act. And definition, it has to be persistent, cannot be destroyed. Fluoride is a mineral, it won't be destroyed. It's bioaccumulative, accumulates in human, in animals and plants, especially in bones and teeth. It's toxic, dangerous immediately on long-term effect. It's anthropogenic, that means made and released by human beings. It doesn't exist in nature, those chemicals. Calcium fluoride exists in nature, but sodium fluoride does not exist. Fluorosilicate is made by human beings. It does not exist in nature. We don't know how they act in our body. There's no research, there's no toxicology test. If you look on your toothpaste, it will be marked, do not swallow. If swallowed, contact poison center, control center immediately. On a label, you're going to see on a mouthwash or toothpaste, if more than used for brushing is accidentally swallowed, get medical help or contact a poison control center right away. Have you checked your toothpaste last night? Check on the label. You're going to see those information on it. If a small amount is swallowed, you have to bring your child right away to the hospital. If the child is under 6 years old, you have to watch him when he brushes his teeth so he doesn't put more than the size of half a pea on his toothbrush. And if he does swallow it, run to the hospital right away because he might have stomach pains and cramps and all types of trouble like that. That's why they put it on the label, because it's toxic. How many of you as parents watch your kids when they brush their teeth at 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years old? Go and brush your teeth. It's important to prevent tooth decay. But you don't wash them. You're having some substance which is just likely less toxic than arsenic and more toxic than lead, and you let your children brush their teeth with a substance that toxic. The Canadian Water Quality Guideline for fluoride for aquatic species in soft water, it's 0.12 milligram by liter. This is about 1/6 of what is put in the water in the city of Ottawa. So the city effluent is about 0.6 to 1.2 milligram by liter, depending if there's a lot of rain, it could dilute the substance, and there's less rain, this goes directly in the river. But it overpassed the amount that could cause damage to the environment. And the law tells you that you're not allowed to put a substance in the river that could cause a damage to the environment. It could be toxic. for the environment. And you have to be prudent. If you think there may be a risk, don't throw the substance in the water right away. Take it out. It would cost a fortune to take the fluoride out of the water of the effluent of the city. It's impossible. So releasing fluoride in municipal effluent at concentration that exceed the concentration that may affect flora or fauna contravene federal and provincial environmental laws. It's illegal to do so. Adding toxic and hazardous waste to drinking water is a serious criminal offense. Because you're putting a poison in the water, a substance that could be toxic for the people. And it's a criminal offense to do so, if you define it as a toxic substance. But it's not defined by the law. What is it? Promoting or permitting illegal act or criminal offenses too. Oops. Toxic substance get fit only two categories, whether toxic waste or substance, but it also could be a drug. That's illegal. It's illegal to have a substance that's toxic because you're going to treat people with a toxic substance against a disease. That's okay. But it has to be a drug. And fluoridated compounds are not drugs. If you are a city councillor, you then have only one choice. If you don't want to act illegally, declare that fluoridation chemicals are drugs. That's the only thing. Otherwise, you're going to be adding a poison to the water, and adding a poison to the water, it's like poisoning people directly. That's illegal. Then a councillor would face three serious legal problems with fluoridation. Problem number one, Health Canada has not approved fluoridation chemicals as drugs. Then it is illegal to administer unapproved drug to patients. Wow. Problem number two, as councillors are not licensed as medical doctors, it is illegal for them to administer a drug. Problem number three, administering a drug beside unapproved to patient without their consent contravene with Article number 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You get in trouble again there. And it would be also a slippery slope. What else should we put in the drinking water? Why not antidepressant drugs? So many people want depressant. There's probably more people, and it costs more for treating depression than tooth decay. So we should put antidepressant drugs in the water.
Don't give them any ideas.
And why not anti-cholesterol drugs? And anti-cholesterol drugs, most of the statin, prevent the synthesis of coenzyme Q10. And as a naturopath, I would recommend to add coenzyme Q10 to the water, because it will prevent heart attacks in patients taking statin drugs. And there's so many people suffering from arthritis and backache and other headaches, and especially women. Painkiller or aspirin. That was for the night man has something for to the wife. Eh? No, tonight I have a headache. I know I'm married. Anything legal with fluoridation? No. Drugs should not be put into drinking water. Because we cannot control how much of the drug anyone would consume in a day, because we don't consume all the same amount of water. I do a lot of sport. When I do bicycle, I do 120 kilometers in a day, and in a hot day, I will drink 5 gallons of water that day. I would drink much too much fluoride if it's fluoridated. I'm lucky I got a well without fluoride in my water. Phew. I don't even have an interest, because I already have non-fluoridated water in my home. I do it because I want to save the life of people. Citizens are deprived of informed choice. They are not informed regarding risk and benefit of those fluoride compounds. They don't have the choice to refute or accept the drugs. It's in the water. You have to drink it. You got no choice. And no trained professional to assess medical needs and adverse effects. It's illegal to put drugs in drinking water. It is illegal. Why do you accept it? Assumption of Food and Drug Act. Unregulated health products are dangerous, therefore must be regulated. If they're not regulated, they have never been proven safe or effective. That's what the federal government says. If it's not approved, if this drug is not approved, you don't have the right to sell it in the country. And if you do, you get in prison right away. If they're not regulated, they're not legal. Fluoridation products, they're not regulated. Then automatically they're not safe. Do we not deserve to be protected by government regulation? I suspect that we should be protected. So, who determines safety of fluoridation chemical? We have been asking freedom of information questions to all the governments. And everyone answers us, oh, it's not us, it's the other agency. Then we write to the other agency, oh, it's not us, it's the other agency that you just have wrote about. Oh. No, it's the federal government that has the responsibility to do it. No, fluoridation is handled by the cities, that's automatically a provincial question. No government agency in Canada regulates fluoridation chemicals. Which health authority claims being accountable for fluoridation? And that was a lot of fun to read those answers. No one. None. No accountability. It is not logical to accept the advice of those who accept no responsibility for those products. Health Canada says, it's not our business. It's the city that put it in the water, it's a provincial responsibility. We did the same thing with Ontario Ministry of Health, Ontario Ministry of Environment, Ontario Ministry of Health Promotion, and it's always the other agency that's responsible. But even in the law, nothing is written down. We don't know who's responsible. We don't even know who to sue. Finally, if no one is responsible, the person is responsible is those that put it in the water. So it's the municipality that are legally responsible because they're doing the job of putting it in the water. But they don't know. They're the one that are choosing fluoridation product, and they're the one to add it in the water, but they don't know that they are accountable. And pleading ignorance of the law, it's not an excuse in front of a judge. That's a lot of fun. Fluoride is not a nutrient. Fluoride is not necessary for human function or reproduction. Health Canada states fluoride is not an essential nutrient. Then why put it in the water if it's not an essential nutrient? Because if it's not essential, you don't really need it. National Academy of Science in the States. These contradictory results do not justify a classification of fluorine as an essential element according to accepted standard. Fluorosilicates are hazardous waste. This is the first time in the history of mankind that anyone has claimed that in a hazardous waste has a health benefit. They tell you it's good for your health, but it's a toxic waste. Even true, no chronic toxicology studies have been performed on them. Even true, Health Canada has not assessed their safety. And a false assumption for people. Taxpayers incorrectly assume that these products are compliant with Canadian laws. Taxpayers incorrectly assume that these products have been assessed for safety. Taxpayers incorrectly assume that these products reduce cavity when swallowed. And taxpayers incorrectly assume that the Health Canada panel evaluating these products has the necessary expertise. In the last report, there were 6 professional experts there. 4 were dentists. Dentists are allowed to talk only about the teeth and the mouth. And the teeth and the mouth is just the gums and that's it. They're not allowed to talk about anything else about the health. 6 of the experts, only 2 were medical toxicologists, and none of them have done research or publication on fluoride. So they were experts on something else than fluoride. And there were the 6 experts from the government. 4 were dentists that knew a little bit about fluoride, but only 3 have published scientific article on the question. The one that came from Quebec had never published any scientific literature on fluoridation. And taxpayers could assume that the Health Canada panel review checked all available research, not just the research that support the policy, but that's what they did. Only check what they would like to see. All the articles that prove the contrary, even when they were written by themselves, were not listed in the report. This is not good science. I'm very sorry, but very bad science. Treatment for removing fluoride, whether reverse osmosis, it's water wasteful, expensive to purchase and maintain. Distillation, expensive to purchase. Remove beneficial mineral, energy user. And the best technique to take the fluoride out of the water, let's stop fluoridation. It's so simple. You just don't put it in. Which is easier? Which is cheaper? Which is most logical? You are our citizens have 2 choices. You get the choice, be forced to drink fluoridated water. You have the choice to get sick with it and die an early death. Or get involved. You got no choice if you want to survive. Now, and get rid of it. Continue this absolute practice is not logical. So if you ever wish to get our book, we have done the translation in English, Fluoridation, Autopsy of a Scientific Error. It's done by Pierre-Jean Morin. It's a PhD in experimental medicine. He's the former environmental counselor for the Ministry of Environment in Quebec. John Remington Graham is a lawyer that have conducted 3 major trials in the States where they have won and have proven that fluoridation was causing cancer, and they have proven that fluoridation was toxic for human beings, causing dental fluorosis and so forth. And me is nothing, I'm just an nature pack. And you could order the book at Édition Berger, and you could order it in English, no problem, and it's cost $39.95. It's a huge work. It took us about 4 years to write the book and to get all the information all organized. And we would rewrite the book another few times because there's so much new information that we have gathered since the last few years. But everything in there is very valuable, and there's many things that you'll find in that book that you won't find in other books on fluoridation. But the best thing to do is to read 4 or 5 of those books to have all the questions, the legal question, the fraud behind it, and things like that. So each book brings you some information. So
Thank you, Gilles.
Come to Canada, you're far less doctrinaire than we are over there. In fact, I see an old acquaintance of mine, Ewan Swan, who I had the delight to debate with the late Dr. David Locker on the Discovery Health Channel a few years back in Toronto. And I was impressed because I had told the producers of the program there was no way that they would get a pro-fluoridationist to debate me. And that would certainly be true of the American Dental Association, but it's obviously not true of the Canadian Dental Association. And I think it reflects a much more moderate and reasonable attitude amongst Canadian professionals that we see in the United States. It is so intensely doctrinaire over there on this issue and many others as well, but particularly this issue. So I have great hope that we're going to see an end to fluoridation beginning in Canada because of the reasonableness of your people, your officials, and your professionals. We already saw a few weeks ago, what was it, what's the town? Waterloo voted down fluoridation after many, many years. We've seen communities in the Niagara region reject fluoridation. You saw Gatineau, Quebec, after an intense campaign, and with Gilles' help, that was stopped in Gatineau. Quebec City stopped fluoridation a few years back. Only a small percentage of Quebec is now fluoridated. Only a small percentage of British Columbia is fluoridated. So mainly the 2 main states, the 2 provinces are Alberta, and we heard yesterday that the county council, or the council of Calgary, voted 5-1 to stop fluoridation. It isn't over yet, but that's a good sign that they're going to hold that to that. A few weeks ago, a council in New York City put in a bill to stop fluoridation in New York City. And if they stop in New York City, that will be the end of fluoridation in the United States, America's biggest city. And that in turn will be the end of fluoridation in the world. So with a little bit of luck, we're going to see an end to this nightmare. This is the book that Gilles was kind enough to mention. It's got a short title but a long subtitle. The Case Against Fluoride, How Hazardous Waste Ended Up in Our Drinking Water and the Bad Science and Powerful Politics That Keep It There. It's written by 3 people, myself, a chemist, James Beck, an MD and PhD, he's a medical biophysicist, and Spedding Micklem, a PhD from Oxford, who was a biologist, a specialist on the immune system. So we have a chemist, a biologist, and a physicist to argue the case. And we've done it without emotion, without exaggeration, I hope. That's what we try to do. And every single fact that we mention in the book is thoroughly documented. You can order it from, it's published by Chelsea Green, which is a well-respected but small publisher in the States. You can order it from Amazon.com, and I suspect from Amazon.ca. So what I'll be talking about tonight, there's not much overlap. This is great with Gilles' talk. I'm going to explain it's a poor medical practice. We've already heard a little bit about that. The evidence of any benefit is weak. The evidence that it actually works. This is a surprise to everybody. Most people are out there thinking, well, it works. They know that because they wouldn't do it if it didn't work. But I'm concerned if there's any dangers. Well, it comes as a bit of a surprise to find that the evidence of benefit is weak. There's no adequate margin of safety from known health effects. Now, this is very important. There is no argument about there being health effects of fluoride. Millions of people have had their health ruined by fluoride. In India, China, parts of Africa, Mexico. No question about that at all. Bones wrecked and other issues. The only argument really is there an adequate margin of safety between the levels which cause harm established and the levels, the doses that we're going to get in a fluoridated community. That's the issue. And it's often ignored. You'll hear these soft words, oh, it's high or it's low. All the studies that show harm, oh, well, that's at high doses. And with fluoridation, it's low doses. But that's not good enough. A scientist wants that quantified, and that quantification process is called a margin of safety analysis. And the promotion of fluoridation is unscientific. It's more like a religion. So, starting off then, fluoridation is a poor medical practice, and I won't take long on this because both Gilles and Richard have talked about this. It's the only time since 1945 that we've used the water supply to deliver medicine, for obvious reasons. It deprives the individual of the right to informed consent to medication, a very important right that the patient has. If a doctor violates that, he's in trouble. You can't control the dose, this is the obvious thing. They make a big point of telling you how carefully they can control the concentration at the waterworks. They can do that. What they can't do is control the dose, because they can't control how much water people drink, on the one hand, and how much fluoride they're getting from other sources. You can't control who gets the medicine. Ask a pharmacologist if you give a medicine to everybody, including a nursing infant, somebody who's sick, somebody who's got poor nutrition, somebody who's very elderly. No. No pharmacist would sanction telling a patient take as much of the drug as you want, and it can go to every patient. And he also would not be allowed to sanction giving a drug to anybody if there wasn't medical oversight by the person that wrote the prescription. That's the whole point of a prescription. When that doctor writes a prescription, it lets the pharmacist off the hook, because the pharmacist knows there's a doctor looking after that patient. And if something happens, that, in theory at least, the doctor would know about it. And there's no health agency is monitoring for side effects. This is unbelievable but true. There's so many bizarre things of this. It's much easier to believe that Gilles and I are stupid, some kind of crazy people, than to believe that your government is crazy and stupid, but you will make your own judgment at the end. It's a known toxic substance, you've heard all about that, and it interferes with many fundamental biochemical functions. 14 years ago, when my wife forced me to get into this issue, she gave me a cup of tea. I should have been suspicious. There's a cup of tea. She put down these papers on my desk. She said, would you read this? And I said, what is it? She said, fluoridation. I said, take those away. Those people are crazy. And that's how we've been indoctrinated particularly in America, that people opposed to fluoridation, John Birch Society, Ku Klux Klan, crazy people, Flat Earth Society, tin foil hats, Dr. Strangelove, these things get churned out. If only journalists realized how absolutely nauseating it is to see an article which talks about Dr. Strangelove. You know, I'm supposed to, whatever I've written in here, what we've written in here is going to be nullified by a film that was made in 1964, including two intelligent journalists. Okay. What shocked me at the time, when I started to read this, when I started to read the papers it gave me, I was looking for an out. I was looking for a way to say to Ellen, look, I told you these people are crazy. Look what they're saying. They confuse fluorine with fluoride. Oh, they've done this, they've done that. And what I found was that fluoride, although as a chemist, it's not an active substance. If I had a jar of sodium fluoride and I put it on that table, it'd still be there 100 years from now if no one touched it. It's not a reactive chemical, but it's extremely active biologically because of what it does in the body. It interferes with enzymes, it interferes with G proteins, it interferes with hydrogen bonds. It has a general toxic effect on all the tissues in the body. So don't be surprised when you hear about all the different health effects it may be causing. The level used in fluoridation is not small. They love to make fun about 1 part per million in the United States. You're 0.7 here. 1 part per million is 1 cent in $10,000. It's 1 inch in 16 miles. That couldn't, that couldn't possibly hurt you. But it's so ludicrous. I mean, we're used to that from the chemical industry. They did the same thing with dioxin. Dioxin, 1 part per trillion is like taking a 1-second vacation after working 33,000 years. Ha 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 ha. 1 part per trillion could hurt you. Well, to say that 1 part per million is small is meaningless unless it's tied to the chemical in question. 1 part per million is actually 100 times higher than the safe drinking water standard for arsenic. Okay? It's also 1,000,000 times too high if you were talking about dioxin. So it's utterly meaningless to make fun of 1 part per million. But if you want to put it into perspective, it is actually 250 times the level in mother's milk. That's the thing that we should be comparing with. And if you're talking about 0.7, that's 175 times the level in mother's milk. So simply put, a bottle-fed baby in Ottawa, that parent is giving their child 175 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby. Or we put it another way, 175 times more fluoride than nature intended for the first meal for your baby. There are many times when fluoridation should have stopped. One of them was in 1999, when the Center for Disease Control, that is the #1 promoter of fluoridation in the United States, admitted that the major benefits of fluoride are topical. It works on the outside of the tube. It doesn't work from inside the body. They said, whoops, we made a mistake. For 50 years, we thought the baby or the pregnant mother needed to get fluoride into their system so that when the baby's teeth are growing under the gums, they're loaded up with fluoride so that when the teeth emerge into the gums, they're more resistant to the acid attack caused by sugar being broken down by bacteria. They said, whoops, no. Not enough fluoride accumulates in the teeth to provide that pre-eruption, to provide that benefit. The predominant benefits are topical. Works on the outside of the teeth. Well, once you've admitted it's topical, why on earth would you put it in the water? Why? It's like swallowing suntan lotion. And this is what a Nobel Prize said about it. In pharmacology, he's one of the Nobel Prize for neuropharmacology. He works with pharmaceuticals which are designed to treat the brain. So there's a lot about the brain. But in pharmacology, if the effect is local, i.e. topical, it's awkward to use it in any other way than as a local treatment. I mean, this is obvious. You have the teeth there. They're available for you. Why drink the stuff? Indeed. Why drink the stuff? The chemicals used are not pharmaceutical grade as in dental products. They come from, you've heard all about that. No need to go through that. The main chemicals are silicon fluorides. Done all that. You've heard this, but let's say it again. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has never regulated fluoride for ingestion, either in tablet form or for the addition to water. its official classification, this is the American version of what you've heard from Gilles on Canada. It's an unapproved drug. If you push them, that's what they have to say. As a result, fluoridation has never been subjected to randomized clinical trials, RCT, for effectiveness as required for other drugs. And after 60 years, it's astounding that there's never been a grade A epidemiological study demonstrating fluoridation's effectiveness. They've never done that randomized clinical trial for effectiveness.
Well, shouldn't it be fluoride has never been subjected?
Yes, fluoride, that should be. Yeah, fluoride, correct, thank you. So, but, as you've heard, the FDA does regulate fluoridated toothpaste. And you've heard about this warning on the back of the tube of toothpaste. Only use a pea-sized amount. Drug facts. Do not swallow. Use only a pea-sized amount. And if you accidentally swallow, contact a poison control center. Now, what is interesting that Gilles didn't do, well, I'll do it. A pea-sized amount of toothpaste contains 1/4 milligram of fluoride. And that's equivalent to 250 milliliters of water. You know, you have 1 part per million is 1 milligram per liter. So 1/4 milligram would be in 1/4 liter, which is 250 milliliters, which is 1 glass of water. Now I think you can get the Monty Python aspect of this thing. On the tube of toothpaste it says only use a pea-sized amount, and if you swallow it, contact a poison control center. Now just imagine for one moment the FDA was actually going to regulate fluoridation. Above your tap it would say, don't swallow, don't drink this water, and if you should accidentally swallow 1 glass of water, contact a poison control center. Now I can't help feeling that some scientists in the FDA were so fed up that they've been excluded from this whole process of water fluoridation that they put this recommendation in there to sabotage the fluoridation program. Now it's only my guess, it's only my guess, because if you join the dots, fluoridation is absolutely absurd. The evidence of benefit is very weak. Most countries don't fluoridate their water, but their kids' teeth are as good, if not better, than those that do. Only 8 countries in the world have more than 50% of their population drinking fluoridated water, not Canada. Canada's less than 40%. We have Australia, Colombia, Ireland, Israel, Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the United States. Nearly all Anglo-American influenced, and many of them are English-speaking. Very much influenced by America, particularly Ireland was influenced by America. Australia and New Zealand by America, and today England. 98% of Western Europe now drinks non-fluoridated water. Some countries started but stopped. Some fluoridate their salt, but even that's a minority. Austria, France, Germany, and Switzerland fluoridate their salt. Now here's the tooth decay coming down in 20 different countries from the 1960s to the present. Coming down in all these countries. Now on that graph there are 4 countries which are fluoridated, and I think it's 16, maybe less, maybe 14, that are non-fluoridated. And if you can tell the difference between the fluoridated and non-fluoridated countries, good luck to you, because I can't. There is no difference. The tooth decay is coming down all over the world, and it may be for 2 reasons, and there's still debated as to why tooth decay is coming down. One reason is possibly the availability of fluoridated toothpaste, because there's much stronger evidence that it works topically than from swallowing it. So with fluoridated toothpaste available in all these countries, that may explain this drop. The other thing is that tooth decay is very much tied to income level. The more wealthy the families, the less tooth decay they have. The poorer the families, the more tooth decay they have. And this may represent improved standard of living in these countries, or a combination for both. Other suggestions have been because we have so much processed food, they add antibiotics to processed food, and maybe it's the antibiotics which are also killing the bacteria which convert sugar to acids. Comparing U.S. states. Now here on this graph, the U.S. states have been organized in sequence of the percentage of the populations drinking fluoridated water. From a state down here which has practically no fluoridation, Hawaii, to the District of Columbia, which is 100% fluoridated, and in between, you're between 0 and 100, is the percentage of the states which are fluoridated. Now in 2002 or 6 or 2004, losing track of the time, but there was a survey done by the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States. And they had a questionnaire. And this questionnaire was administered in 50 states. And one of the questions they asked was, does your child or do your children have very good or excellent teeth? And here are the answers, yes. Here are the answers, yes. And you see that the line hovers around 40 to 60%. There's about 50%. But you notice there's no relationship between the shape of that line, which is essentially flat, and this curve here. You would expect, if there was a strong relationship between fluoridation and tooth decay, that you would have fewer very good teeth down here and more very good teeth up here, but you don't see that. Now what I didn't tell you was that those are the answers from low-income families. You look at the answers from high-income families, and here you see very little noise at all, and this hovers around 80%. And what this tells you, again, there is no relationship between these answers and whether your kid's drinking fluoridated water or not. But what is clear in this is a very strong relationship with income levels. And this is what you find. If you do the largest surveys, the largest study, when you get as many people in the study as possible, any effect of fluoridation is actually dwarfed by the noise and other factors. And it's only when you restrict yourself to very small studies where you're comparing two communities that you can see any difference. And then, of course, it's upset if you don't control very carefully for confounding variables. So strong relationship with income levels, but not a clear relationship with fluoridation. Now, the largest survey ever done in the United States was done in the 86-87. It cost the U.S. taxpayers a lot of money. They looked at the teeth of 39,000 children in 84 communities. And they found no statistical difference, or at least Dr. Yamayanis, when he looked at the tooth decay as measured by decayed, missing and filled teeth, he found no statistical difference between the children who'd lived in fluoridated communities all their lives, non-fluoridated or partially fluoridated, sometime one, sometime in the other. They just overlapped. For the ages of 5 to 17, decayed, missing and filled teeth, there was no obvious relationship. Now, when the NIDR itself looked at the data with Brunel and Carlos, they jacked up the sensitivity by a factor of 5. They didn't look at decayed, missing and filled teeth. They looked at decayed, missing and filled surfaces. There are between 4 and 5 surfaces to a tooth. The top 6 and the bottom 6 cutting teeth only have 4 surfaces for this purpose. All the rest have 5 surfaces. So on average, somewhere between 4 and 5 surfaces. But you jacked up the sensitivity. And they found, if they looked at the average for 5 to 17-year-olds, children who lived all their lives in a non-fluoridated community, 3.4 decayed, missing and filled surfaces. Less than 1 tooth. If they looked at children who lived all their lives in a fluoridated community, they found 2.8 decayed, missing and filled surfaces. 2 small numbers. And if you subtract one from the other, apparently the benefit of living in a fluoridated community amounted to a saving of 0.6 of 1 tooth surface. So the largest survey done ever in the United States indicates, at best, a saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface. Now keep that in mind when we start talking about health effects. I mean, how many health risks are you going to take for 0.6 to save 0.6 of a tooth surface? Other studies have found even less, by the way. And if you want to see, Chapter 8 in our book goes through quite a series of studies indicating very little difference between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. Here's from the late David Locker, who I debated in Toronto some years ago. Lovely man. He says the magnitude of fluoridation's effects, meaning benefit, is not large in absolute terms, is often not statistically significant, and may not be of clinical significance. And these 2 studies, which are recent, are very interesting, because one of the things which Brunel and Carlos did not do when they were establishing that 0.6 difference, they didn't allow for the delayed eruption of teeth. And there is some evidence that the eruption of the teeth is delayed in fluoridated communities. And it turns out that that 0.6 of a tooth surface difference, average from 5 to 17, completely disappears if you assume 1 year delay in eruption of the teeth. You can see this. If you've got less teeth in your mouth, you've got less surfaces to be decayed. So Kovarak did control for delayed eruption of teeth and found no difference in a very large European survey. And Warren's study from Iowa is very important because there they actually looked at individual exposure to fluoride. They measured the amount of fluoride in their cases that the kids had actually swallowed, and they found no relationship between tooth decay and the amount of fluoride that they had swallowed. All of this, by the way, makes sense once you accept that it works topically, not systemically. And modern studies show that tooth decay does not go up when communities stop fluoridation. Now, there's some crappy studies from the past, like Antigo in Wisconsin, which is, I believe, absolutely fudged study by the state of Wisconsin, which were absolutely horrified that any town had broken ranks. So they quickly, after a few years of stopping fluoridation, produced this study which said that tooth decay was rocketing in Antigo and started fluoridation again. But be that as it may, modern studies, well-designed studies from former East Germany, Cuba, Canada, and Finland, British Columbia that was, shows tooth decay did not go up when fluoridation stopped. Not the anticipation or the expectation of these researchers, by the way, who in the main are pro-fluoridation. 3, there's no adequate margin of safety to protect from known harmful effects. Harmful effects have been carefully documented in a 507-page report by the U.S. National Research Council. Now, if you like, this is fluoride, this is son of fluoride. Basically, this report, this 507-page report with 1,100 references conducted by the first balanced panel, which contained both pro-fluoridation and anti-fluoridation people, and people who never taken a position. So it was a really balanced panel. This should have ended fluoridation right here, when they documented all the health effects. And anybody that was honest would realize that there was no margin of safety to protect everybody in society from here. However, this is a pretty dense document. It's not easy to read for the average person. And after the press had noticed it for about a couple of 2 days, it just disappeared from view. And that's one of the reasons that we wrote this book, to try to make this information much more accessible to people, and also cover areas which they didn't cover. So, there's the book. It's called Fluoride in Drinking Water, a Scientific Review of EPA's Drinking Water Standards. The harmful effects that they looked at: dental fluorosis, that's mottling, discoloration of the enamel, brain damage, lowered thyroid function, accumulation of the pineal gland, bone damage, osteosarcoma, the question mark about that. This is a rare bone cancer, but it particularly affects young men, young boys and men. And some people are very sensitive to very low levels of fluoride. Totally ignored, by the way. There's not one single fluoridated country that has ever attempted to put these anecdotal reports onto a scientific level. Early promoters thought at 1 part per million they could limit dental fluorosis to about 10% of children in its very mild form. This was a conscious trade-off, that you would reduce tooth decay and only have about 10% of the kids with very mild dental fluorosis, with white spots, streaks on the cusp of the teeth, up to 25%. That's what they thought. Well, run the clock forward. This study that was done in 86, 87, that big one, the results published in 97 by Heller, 29.9%, nearly 30% of kids in fluoridated communities in the United States now have dental fluorosis, 3 times the desired amount, and even kids in non-fluoridated areas are over 20%. So you've got the so-called halo effect. If you put it in the water, then it goes into food, it goes into processed food, it goes into beverages, and then it's distributed throughout the country. Now, not all of that 29.9% was in the very mild. 22.5% in the very mild, 5.8% in the mild, 1.3% in the moderate. And by the way, the father of fluoridation, Treadley Dean, said that he would not accept mild dental fluorosis as a trade-off for reduced tooth decay. So obviously it's failed the anticipations and desires of the original fluoridators. But listen to those words carefully. Very mild, mild, moderate. And we only get a sort of little red flag maybe when you get to severe. Let's have a look at what it looks like. This is very mild. Very mild, by definition, impacts up to 25% of the tooth surface. So this would be called very mild, because it's up to 25% of the tooth surface. And that affects 22.5% of kids. Now, to be fair, this is one extreme of very mild. So the other extreme is just a little opaque patches at the cusp of the teeth. But there's nothing vague about the next one, which is mild. Mild. Up to 50% of the tooth surface is affected. And don't tell me only a dentist would recognize up to 50% of the tooth surface is impacted. And that's impacting, in 86, 87, 5.8% of kids in the fluoridated communities. Now get this one, moderate. Moderate is 100% of the tooth surface has now been impacted with some indentations. And that impacts over 1 in 100 of American children. And this today is accepted by the dental community in the United States as merely a cosmetic effect. To hell with the psychological damage that you do to a teenager that doesn't want to smile because they don't want to reveal that to their prospective boyfriend or girlfriend. Now, to make matters worse, the numbers have gone up. Since that was done, the numbers have gone up by 9%. And overall, the whole of America, 32% now of all American kids have dental fluorosis. And not some of them now in the severe category. And just at the end of last year, the Center for Disease Control said that 41% of American kids aged 12 to 15, this is all kids, including those in non-fluoridated communities, 41% now have dental fluorosis. And this is triggered, I'm sure you read about it, January the 7th, the CDC said we're going to lower the level of fluoride, so-called optimal level, because this is obviously even more than they can stomach, which is amazing. Recent events, well, I just mentioned that, they lowered it to 0.7. And something which is dearer to our hearts, and maybe yours, is that after 9 years of struggle, largely for my wife here, we finally got the EPA to withdraw sulfurofluoride from the market. Sulfurofluoride is a chemical made by Dow AgroSciences. It's a fumigant. It was used for years on buildings, on structures, to kill various insects and so on. But a few years ago, 9 years ago to be precise, then the EPA said you can use this as a fumigant on food in warehouses and processing plants, and more recently in pre-treatment of soils. We said no, and the reason that we said no is that kids are already overexposed to fluoride, and you can't give them any more. And after wrangling and wrangling and wrangling backwards and forwards and going through 3 absolutely atrocious health risk assessments conducted by our scientists in the country, at one point claiming that the reference dose for an infant could be 10 times higher than the reference dose for an adult. Give me a break, that's Alice in Wonderland stuff. In order to get the science to prove that what they were doing was, what they wanted to do was safe. Finally, on Monday, January the 10th, in a conference call said, we accept all your objections, we're going to get this phased out of the market in 3 years. Needless to say, Dow AgroSciences will probably spin this thing out, will appeal in court. They've got one friend in the Senate, Senator Inhofe, who's going to help them. He's going to have hearings on it. I do hope he has hearings, because when the senators and the public see the absolutely massacre of science that went into those health risk assessments, even they are going to gag. A key question, here's the key question. When fluoride is damaging the growing tooth cells, causing dental fluorosis, what is it doing to the other developing tissues? Since 1950, that is the question which has never been addressed by the U.S. government or all those professional agencies which, like a bunch of clockwork toys, endorsed fluoridation after the Public Health Service did it in 1950. They will not ask that question. They cannot. If you said to them, well, look, what's the best evidence that you can provide to me that when the fluoride is causing this damage to the teeth, it's not doing damage to the brain? Can't do it. What's the evidence it's not doing any damage to the bone? Can't do it. What's the evidence it's not damaging the thyroid? Can't do it. Why? Because they haven't done the studies. At birth, the baby's blood-brain barrier is not fully developed. Actually, I saw a study, a recent study, which says that's not true, that the blood-brain barrier may be complete during... No, that's very, very new. It's very new. Okay. Very new. So there's a conflict there, obviously, that has to be resolved. But it's certainly the baby should not be exposed to fluoride up to, in your case, 175 times the level of fluoride in mother's milk. Back to Arvid Carlsson. Arvid Carlsson was the scientist in Sweden who led the campaign against fluoridation, successful campaign in the 1970s. And in 1978, he says, one wonders what an increase in exposure to fluoride, such as occurs in bottle-fed infants, may mean for the development of the brain and the other organs. Now that was such a prophet-like thought. Obviously he was very interested in the brain, because since he made that statement, well, first of all, the National Research Council in that report acknowledged it is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. Many more studies, since they wrote this, published this in 2006, many more studies have been published on the brain than even they considered. And in fact, there have now been over 100 animal studies which shows that fluoride can damage the brain. Over 100. There's one study, and they usually, oh, well, these are high doses, high doses. First of all, you have to dose a rat 5 to 10 times as much fluoride to reach the same blood levels of fluoride as a human being. And it is the blood levels which are going to cause a health effect, if there's one. But in this study, they used very low levels. 1 part per million fluoride in their water given to rats for 1 year, and the rats had kidney damage, brain damage observable under a microscope, greater uptake of aluminium into the brain, and beta amyloid deposits, which are characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. And in human studies, there are 23 published studies from China, Iran, India, and Mexico indicating an association between moderate exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ, and there have just been 2 more. One was going to be published in Environmental Health Perspectives. It's now been withdrawn, I'll explain in a moment. And another one just published by Ding. But let's talk about this study. This is the Zhang study from 2003. He compared the IQs of children in 2 villages, which I actually went to China and visited. One village was less than 0.7 parts per million. The other village was between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million fluoride in the water. He controlled for both lead exposure and iodine intake, which is very important. He found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range, and he estimated that the IQ in children would be lowered by 1.9 parts per million. And so that is no margin of safety. There's no adequate margin of safety. Usually what we do when we're trying to gauge where, to protect the whole population, once we found a health effect, we determine what the lowest observable adverse effect level is to cause that health effect, and then divide by 10, if it's a small study, so that we've got an adequate margin of safety to protect everyone in society. You assume a range of sensitivity in any human population. So that margin of safety is important. So obviously this is concentration, not dose, and we've already been into that issue, but let's for the moment simplify it. If you just assume that all the kids were drinking the same amount of water, then the acceptable level would be down to 0.19. And there's no way that fluoridation could continue. So this study really, in my view, killed fluoridation. Again, concentration. Don't forget, a child drinking 2 liters of water at 1 part per million would get a higher dose than a child drinking 1 liter of water at 1.9 parts per million. Now what Zhang's done, and this is the study that was about to be published in Environmental Health Perspectives, which is very important because that's the journal of the National Institute of Environmental Health Studies in the United States, which is part of the great Department of Health and Human Services empire. So this is the, inside the heart of the beast that promotes fluoridation. They were going to publish this study, and he had added something else to this data, and that was he found an association between the blood levels of fluoride and lowered IQ. So there's an association. Now that brings you closer to individual dose, because you don't know how much water kids are drinking, but once you got down to measuring fluoride in their blood, you got a pretty good idea of their dose. And there was a correlation between those lowered IQs and the fluoride levels. The reason it was withdrawn is that some of the material had been published before, and that journal does not allow that. You can't republish the same data, which is sad. But the good news is that they verified essentially by peer reviewing it and about to publish it, they verified there was nothing wrong with the methodology. Because the proponents will try to persuade you that all these IQ studies, they're junk science, the methodology is all wrong, etc., etc., etc. 2 more IQ studies published, one by Zhang, the papers have been withdrawn, another one by Ding, published a couple of weeks ago, and we've just discovered another one from Mexico, which we'd overlooked, that deals with an association between visual spatial learning and fluoride exposure. This is from Russia, Almador. This is a very important study, and my son, who's very sharp on these things, when he found this, he says, this is very, very important, because it's just, we need to refine intelligence much more carefully than just IQ tests. You've got to look more carefully at individual aspects which contribute to intelligence, and that's what these people have done here. Okay, so now into part 4. There are many other health effects, but obviously time limits that, and you've got them in the book if you want to go through it. We have a chapter on each health concern. The key health studies have not been done in most fluoridating countries. No investigation of a possible relationship between consumption of fluoridated water and lowered IQ in children. In nearly all the fluoridated countries. There's one small study from New Zealand. That's it. Nothing in Canada. There's practically no health studies done in Canada. No. Arthritic symptoms in adults, even though the first symptoms of fluoride poisoning of the bones is just like arthritis. Nobody's bothered to check to see if there's a relationship between arthritis and how many years you've lived in a fluoridated community. None. In hypothyroidism, for years doctors used to use fluoride to lower the activity of the thyroid gland, and yet we have almost an epidemic of hypothyroidism, and again, nobody is looking to see if there's a relationship in fluoridated countries. Any study that is found is usually in countries which do not have a fluoridation program to protect. Increased bone fractures in children. In Mexico, they did a study which shows that the bone fractures in kids increased linearly with the severity of dental fluorosis. Linearly. You went from no dental fluorosis to very mild, doubled. Went from very mild to mild, bone fractures doubled again. No attempt to reproduce this in any fluoridated country. Earlier onset of puberty. It concentrates in the pineal gland. Alzheimer's disease, based upon that Varna study. Nor have studies investigated people that complain of being very sensitive to fluoride. Very few. This is the most amazing thing. If you know anything about epidemiology, and you had to study a health problem, what you would want, ideally, is a very simple biomarker of exposure. And we've been given that on a plate. The severity of dental fluorosis is a reflection of how much fluoride the kid was exposed to before their permanent teeth have come out. So now you think about this in the United States. We have millions of kids with no dental fluorosis. We have millions of kids with very mild dental fluorosis. We have millions of kids with mild dental fluorosis. And maybe hundreds of thousands of kids with moderate dental fluorosis. You've got epidemiological studies on a plate if you wanted to look at IQ, earlier onset of puberty, thyroid function, bone fractures. You've got everything in place to do that if the government was interested, remotely interested, in seeing if its pet project was safe or not. If you don't look, you don't find. The absence of studies does not mean the absence of harm. As I said before, in Canada, there have been practically no health studies done whatsoever of communities that have been fluoridated. Practically none. I would say 3 or 4 max. Max. Oh, you got lots of studies on teeth. They have so many studies on teeth, you'd think that teeth were the only tissue in the body. That we are one great big block of tooth with little legs on it, running around. Oh, and here is your chief dental officer of Canada. Oh, he's an awfully nice man, is Dr. Peter Cooney, awfully nice. And he told an audience in Dryden, Ontario, and I was there, and it was videotaped, so what I'm about to give you is an exact quote. He said, I walked down your high street today, and I didn't see anyone growing horns, and you've been fluoridated for 40 years. Well, I'm glad to say that the people of Dryden were not taken in by that, and a few weeks later they voted fluoridation out of their city. But it did occur to me that what's going on in Health Canada, you've got this whole office with horns. You have specialists on deer horns, cow horns, moose horns, and these different specialities comb Canada on a daily basis, looking for human beings with horns growing out of their heads. And if they don't find any horns, then they know that fluoridation is perfectly safe and we should continue indefinitely. Well, I hope I've told you enough to show you that the science which underpins fluoridation is absolutely pathetic. And you can see it. We absolutely go through the science and show how poor it is. Now, to end it, we're doing several things. First of all, we're making all these studies available for people. You don't have to go to the libraries. They're all there. We have a health database. We've got a professional statement now signed by over 3,500 professionals, dentists, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, all kinds of different professions, calling for an end to fluoridation worldwide. We've got this 29-minute videotape which you can watch online, incidentally, as well as the fluoride dissection with Chris Bryson. This is a brilliant book if you want to know why it started. Not why it continues, but why it started. This is a brilliant book, over 100 pages of documentation. I have a 28-minute interview with Chris Bryson on here, and if you are interested with this tape, which you can watch for free online, then, and you're intrigued by it, then you can go to the book and see the documentation. Basically, his thesis is that fluoridation began in the 40s because there were many industries that were facing lawsuits on fluoride pollution, farmers, etc. And they were concerned about liability, not just for pollution, but the health damage that they were doing to their own workers. And so it was a masterstroke, if you like, to offset the image of fluoride at the time as being the worst pollutant, the pollutant that caused more damage to agriculture than any other pollutant at the time in the 40s. This image of fluoride was changed to something which was safe enough to drink in your water, and your kiddies could put it on their teeth. But this is the videotape I'd like you all to watch, and it's only 29 minutes long, has 15 scientists, including Arvid Carlson, the Nobel Prize winner, and many other distinguished doctors, dentists, scientists, and so on. And in terms of trying to reach professionals, you may have more luck in Canada than in the United States, but if you approach a professional in the United States, doctor or dentist, you use the word fluoride, comes out of your mouth, their eyes are roll. And you are suddenly, you've got a strange, weird disease. You're a crazy person. They want to get rid of you as soon as possible. So don't do that. Don't try to argue with them. Just say, Doc, you know more about this than I do. You're a professional, you're a dentist, or you're a doctor. I've watched this videotape on fluoridation, and I'm very concerned. I would appreciate it if in your home, sometime in the next few weeks, you would take 29 minutes and watch it yourself, and then tell me if, based upon your professional knowledge, I should be concerned or not. What's your response to this? So you're appealing to you're not challenging them, you're not attacking them, you're not arguing with them, you're appealing to their open-mindedness, which is a rare trait, unfortunately, their open-mindedness and their willingness to look at this and then tell you what they should think. And I showed it to my dentist, and the next day I was having my teeth cleaned in the office, and he came in, as the teeth would get, and went, he says, I watched the videotape, it's excellent. It's excellent. He said, I'm going to get all my staff to watch this. And he said, I'm so glad you didn't go after fluoride in dentistry. He says, that's a different issue. He says, I agree with you, you shouldn't put it in the drinking water. And many dentists actually will tell you that although they think that fluoride has a role in dentistry, it should not be put in the drinking water. But most of them won't come out in public and say that, because there's so much harassment going on, much more so, I suspect, in the United States and Canada. And then our book. I think the book is there. You know, if you really get into a tense argument with somebody who's obviously genuine, rather than people who are satisfied that watching Dr. Strangelove is enough to win the argument. If you get to somebody who's generally interested, then this book is fairly easy to read, and I think what we have the right to expect is that we took time out to present our case. We made it totally transparent. As I said, it's not emotional, it's not exaggeration. We tried to back every fact with references. And now what I would hope is the combined forces of the American Dental Association, Center for Disease Control, who've got so much money. You wouldn't believe how much money. The ADA raises $100 million a year. They've got 20 full-time lobbyists in Washington. They got enough money to employ several writers, umpteen scientists, to take this apart.
And they will.
And I hope they do. I hope they do. I hope they come back with the case for fluoride, and then people will have two books to read, ours and theirs. And if that happens, good luck. And if they win, great! Get me out of here! I'm fed up with this. It is the most depressing thing to study science all your life and have your own government tear it up in front of your face. Behave in the unscientific way that these guys behave in the face of this science. And we just had it just now. We've just had it, right? In January the 7th, after 5 years, remember this National Research Council report, recommendation of March the 22nd, 2006, said to the EPA, your safe drinking water is not safe, you should lower it, you should do a health risk assessment to determine a new safe level. Okay? So what did they do? They confined, the EPA dumped on our plates 945 pages after waiting nearly 5 years. 940, we've got to make comments in 30 days on this thing. 945 pages. But they only considered 3 things. Fluoride's damage to teeth, dental fluorosis, they can't deny that one. And secondly, the second stage of dental fluorosis, which is akin to arthritis, and finally bone fractures. All the stuff on IQ, which we've been sending them on a regular basis, the 100 animal studies, the 25 IQ studies, completely blown off, as if they've never happened. And yet these guys acknowledge it, but they only had 5 of the 25 IQ studies when they wrote this. Another 20! But it doesn't happen. As a scientist, that makes you want to. But it's your government that will. We pay for these people. Okay, enough from me. Let me, Gilles, you come back. Let's see if we've got any questions. Questions, anyone? Oh, down one. Down one. Over here. I've been stung. Friendly.
I want to know if there's any press here. Is there any press here at all?
Unfortunately, they're all invited, but
No press? No.
Press.
I can do it.
No, they're watching Dr. Strangelove to, you know.
No councillors either?
no.
Support the policy, just keep you away, and they want to continue to nurture the idea that we too are a bunch of crazies. We're crazy people.
You include me in that.
Yeah, we will. Yes.
And I have a comment and a question, I guess. If you look at the Code of Ethics in the Canadian Medical and the Canadian Dental Association,
Yes.
they both talk about informed consent.
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing is that the Canadian Dental Association talks about very specifically informed consent if what is involved is a supplement of fluoride for a patient. They must have informed consent.
Yeah.
And it's really inexplicable to me how we can't figure out that the fluoride in the water is a supplement.
Yeah, why should one require informed consent and the other one apparently not?
So it seems to me that the dentists which are saying fluoride great are actually against their own code of ethics. Same thing with some of the doctors that are doing this.
The American Medical Association, if you go to the AMA's website, is very specific about informed consent. Very, very specific. And basically what we're allowing, this is good that you brought this up, what we're allowing is a whole community to do to everyone what an individual doctor can do to no one. An individual doctor cannot do this. An individual doctor cannot treat two people at the same time. It's one at a time. It's one-on-one. And an individual doctor, if he poured out a glass of fluoridated water and say, drink this, it's going to do you good, and you say, I don't want to drink that, he can't tell you you must drink it. He can tell you, look, if you drink this, your toenails will get shorter, or something's going to happen that's good for you, all right? But he's also obliged to tell you, but, you know, as well as your toenails getting shorter, then your hair might fall out, but, you know, let's trade it off, blah, blah, blah. I suggest you do. Fair enough. But you have to make the decision whether you're going to drink that water with whatever's in there yourself. It's not forced upon you. And, you know, we've had court cases in the United States which have been resolved this way. They say, this medication is not being forced on you. The fluoridated tap water is only delivered to the tap. You determine whether you drink what comes out of the tap. So you do have the right to refuse fluoridated water. We're not forcing it upon you. We just deliver it to the tap. And of course the answer to that is that there's quite a sizable section of our population that doesn't have the luxury of not drinking the water that comes out of the tap. They have to, because they can't afford bottled water for cooking and drinking. So it's really quite false to say that we have a choice. We need to drink water. Yeah.
I have something to say. Actually, I remember reading with my grandfather one of his emails that that some of the people that actually was the experts know nothing against the fluoride.
Some of the experts were against the fluoride?
No,
they don't know much.
They know nothing.
They know nothing about fluoride. In the court action in the States,
Yes.
for example, the experts were facing the judge and they were asking, have you read this report, this research, and this, that? And the expert defending fluoridation saying, oh, we're very sorry, we didn't read that.
Yeah.
So the lawyer asked another question, have you read that research on cancer? I said, no, we didn't read that. And after 20 listing, I asked you, what did you read? Oh, I had a training last week with the dental surgeon of the city, and he have talked to me about fluoridation. That's all what I know about. I'm the expert in court, but I didn't read anything about fluoridation.
Yeah, it's absolutely typical. Basically, when you hear experts who are brought out in the public, and they usually, you know, when a community is thinking of either stopping or starting fluoridation, at the first public hearing, they'll fill the audience with dentists and so on, and maybe a few pediatricians, and they get up on their feet and they'll be quite categorical. Trust us, we're your professionals, we are telling you that fluoridation is safe and effective. Safe and effective and cost effective. I think they get a bonus every time they use the word safe and effective. However, when you ask them for evidence, they don't cite the primary studies in the literature. What they do is to keep citing endorsements. This is safe because the ADA says it's safe, the AMA says it's safe, the WHO Health Organization says it, the CDC says it, Health Canada says it's safe. They all say it's safe and effective. And basically what they've done is to create this very large skirt behind which professionals think they can hide. Their professional bodies are telling them it's safe. Well, why would they go after little Joe Blogs when you've got the AMA and the ADA and the CDA and so on? They're the guys who are going to take the hit when they finally find that this is a bunch of baloney. So it's brilliantly done. And it's also coupled with this other thing about saying how crazy the opponents are. I give you two examples. I give them in the book, but I'll give them to you here.
I'll come back after.
Yeah. The first example, the first day I got involved, 14 and a half years ago, I'm walking with Ellen to the village council meeting, and I said, oh, when they hear what I read this afternoon, there's no way that they're going to continue fluoridation. I said, this is an easy one. I said, this is going to be easy. Well, we go in there, and the whole place is lined up with dentists, one or two doctors, and we struggle to present the science of this thing, and the dentists are swearing up and down it's wonderful and safe and so on. And then the people in the audience will put up their hands and say, I don't know about the science, but my dentist tells me it's okay, and if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. And then there's one woman stood up, she said, this is a very graphic moment for me. She says, there's nobody in this county I respect more than Dr. Paul Connett, because we've worked together on fighting an incinerator proposal. She said, however, I've just had a baby, and my doctor tells me that fluoridation is safe. And so I'm going to go along with this. She's actually since changed her mind, but never mind. So after the meeting, I went up to the doctor in question and I said, would you read these 3 papers, which I read that afternoon? And he said, I don't have time to do that. Well, I said, look, the people have told you that they're going along with this because you're saying it's okay. He says, well, I don't have time to read every study that comes across my desk on every issue. I said, look, I understand that. But I said, you shouldn't give the people the impression that you've studied this issue professionally and it's your professional judgment that it's safe when you haven't read the literature. And I have since discovered in 14.5 years that this was a microcosm of what I've found all around the world, that we'll get doctors and dentists, state health officials, local health officials, even federal health officials, going onto public platforms and saying that fluoridation is safe and effective when they haven't read the literature, or very little of the primary literature. All they read is big reviews which give this umbrella. And the second story is I met up with the Chief Health Officer of Victoria, the state of Victoria in Australia, which has mandatory fluoridation. They literally forced fluoridation on communities. They have no chance to vote on it. They can't vote it in, they can't vote it out. They're just forced upon them. And I said to the Chief Health Officer, I said, have you read my 50 reasons to oppose fluoridation? He says, we've read them, he says, but nothing in that has changed our position on fluoridation. Well, I said, would you please then put your response to these 50 reasons in writing? And he looked me straight in the eye and says, neither I nor my staff have any intention of doing that. Meanwhile, they spent a fortune on public relations officers writing a pamphlet, answers to commonly answered questions. Apparently, they're good at asking questions, and very good at answering their own questions. But it comes to people that know something about it, who pose them tough questions, then they refuse to do it. Then I said the second question to him, I said, well, look, Dr. Hill, I think his name. I said, Dr. Hill, I said, if fluoride is good for children's teeth, babies' teeth, I said, why is it the level in mother's milk is so low? And he says, well, so Mother Nature has dealt some children a lousy deal.
Probably right.
That's right, a lousy deal. I mean, meaning the children that were unlucky enough to be born in a non-fluoridated community, that was nature's decision. So,
The same in Quebec, we have asked the Minister of Health, we have sent FOI, Freedom of Information request, with 288 questions, because in Quebec, they have stated that there was 27,000 studies. So I just asked them, can you supply me the list of the 27,000 studies published, and where they were published? Because at the National Research Council, they have found there's only 1,000 references, and scientific references about 700, 800.
yeah.
About. So if those researchers didn't find more than 1,000, how come there's 27,000 in your case? And also the York Review have listed there was 214 studies that were putting in, and most of them were on the side effect of fluoridation, and not only a good effect. How come you're able to say there's 27,000 studies? They refused to answer the FY. So we weren't in court against them. And the responsible person from the government, when the judge asked him, why don't you answer those questions? He said, we don't have the team to answer. We only have 2 persons competent at the ministry to answer those questions. And we don't have the time to do so.
But they
2
had time to
persons
find,
competent.
they had time to find 27,000.
Yes, they were having
Gentleman back there has a question.
Yeah.
I might have missed it, but I don't remember seeing anything on the infiltration of fluoride in the body through the skin every time we take a shower. The biggest organ on our body.
Yeah.
Every time we
Good
take a
point.
shower.
I wish someone would put that on a scientific level. You know, one's gut feeling is that when you go into a hot bath, especially a hot bath, your pores open, and whereas fluoride will probably be water soluble, wouldn't work its way through the waxy layer on the skin, you would think when the pores open then the fluoride would find its way in into the bloodstream.
And with the soap also, the water tension reduced, so you
Yeah.
can go through the skin more easily.
Yeah, but I would like to see it quantified. I would like someone to do a relatively simple experiment of putting someone in a bath and drawing blood, with fluoridated water, and drawing blood to see if you can see an increase in the plasma.
That's why I take cold showers.
Yeah. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that, I heard that Gagnon mentioned as one of the places that voted it down. I was an observer of the whole procedure because my wife was the leading advocate starting 25 years ago. And I think I learned something about campaign strategy.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a losing battle until after going to many meetings, the mayor casually made a remark at one of the meetings when he looked at the agenda, and you're always free to go early and get a subject on the agenda. He looked at the agenda, and for several times in a row, fluoride was on the agenda. And he said, I'm getting tired of this subject. He wasn't really for or against, but I think basically he wanted to get rid of the question.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife kept following him around because the meetings took place in different towns. We move around.
Mm-hmm.
Aylmer, or you go 45 miles the next time, you go to Buckingham, or you go to Hull the next time. And my wife showed up every time, usually with a different team. Sometimes it was heavy on the scientific side, and other times it was heavy on the political side. And then at the last meeting, we somehow arranged to have some teenagers there on the anti-fluoride side. So the political strategy is keep coming, keep getting it on the agenda, keep bringing the best evidence you can. And I must say we credit a lot of the source of our evidence was Dr. Gilka, an Ottawa retired doctor. In fact, the reason we're here tonight is that she phoned my wife to tell her about this meeting.
Great.
Anyway, we were the most surprised when the final vote came, and it was an overwhelming vote against fluoridation.
I think 16 against 2, if my memory is good, or 14 against 2.
Yeah.
You see, this is where Quebec has been so good for us, because by and large in America, when the community gets organized and they get a fairly decent help from the media, who provide both sides, then we've got a very good chance of keeping it out of a new community today. But it's much more difficult when you're fighting against the status quo. When it's been in there for a number of years, it's much more difficult to get it out.
But one thing you could do, and in Quebec, freedom of information request is free.
Yeah.
Any citizen could write to the city and ask them for documents. For example, give me the studies, the toxicology studies on the fluoridation that prove that the product is acceptable. And most of the cities will answer, we don't have those documents.
Yeah.
But that's a very good way to educate it, because you could tell before in the presentation that this is very essential. You have to have toxicology studies on it. If you don't have it, it's illegal to put it in the water. If they can't tell you or show you those studies or supply those studies, they're in trouble legally. And this helps a lot to move. In Ontario, you have to pay for freedom of information.
This is good. I think Gilles and the other folks who've fought in Quebec are really fantastic, absolutely fantastic. We're very envious of your success rate and so on. But what was I going to say? Oh, I forgot what I was going to say.
So
I'll think of it in a moment.
we're Quebec, we have done that. Each department, almost each cities, we have sent FOI, and they're blocked. They cannot give us the answer. And this is very powerful to educate also the people here. So you could do the same thing in Ottawa. Ask your city to supply us the information.
I just thought what I was going to say. Basically, when you're fighting this in the United States, you're up against two chains of command. One is headed by the ADA in Chicago, which filters down through every state dental society, through down to every local dental society, down to every dentist. And essentially, when a town is threatened one way or the other, they will mobilize all their dentists in their area to descend upon the town and literally intimidate the councillors. We are your professionals. How dare you disagree with us? Continue fluoridation. Well, that's on the one hand. You've got this other chain of command, which is Department of Health and Human Services, the health system of the United States, which feeds down to every health department. And nearly every health department has a chief dental officer, a health dental officer, whose function is to keep going more fluoridation, get rewards, recognition, and so on, and also into the local health districts. What you learn about bureaucracy is you don't make waves. And once a policy has been established by whoever it is, the CDC or Health Canada, your task down the line, the chain of command, is to carry out policy. It's not to question policy. If you start questioning policy, then don't expect to be in employment very long. And there are a lot of people that's jobs depend upon promoting fluoridation. And you will find in Ontario, I don't know if you've confronted this issue, but the key showstoppers, when the council moves against fluoridation, even talking about it, immediately the health officer, the district health officer, will be the key player.
And he won't call Coney, and they're going to pay, the city will pay for Dr. Coney from the federal government, which is not supposed to have two salary.
Yeah.
They're going to pay Dr. Coney money to defend fluoridation in that city. And this has happened many times in Ontario.
Yeah, but it's the local
This is
health.
illegal, though. You're not supposed to have two salary. So that's where we're going into, too.
But I think that the more telling one, I don't think anybody takes Peter Cooley too seriously. The longer he stays as Chief Dental Officer for Canada, the more likely we are to beat fluoridation here. But it's the medical officers who have much more credibility. These medical officers that the council goes to, they rely on these people to tell them what to do if there's a smallpox outbreak or this, that, and the other.
That's the case in Ottawa.
Yeah, when it's a health issue, then these people's words are gospel, and all they're giving is the doctrine, the policy.
Yeah.
The Medical Association, the Board of Medical Doctors, the Collège des Médecins in Quebec, we have sent them the 288 question of the FOI. And what they answer, we did not support fluoridation since 1988 because they're so much afraid to be sued.
Who was that, Gilles?
The Collège des Médecins, that's the
College of
board,
Doctors.
the medical board of doctors in
Like
Quebec.
our AMA?
That's right, but for the province of Quebec.
Yeah. For the province.
So they have said we have not defended fluoridation since 1988.
That's good.
We leave that to the government. So we're not responsible for that anymore. That's a good point. In Quebec, for example, they have compared tooth decay of Quebec and Ontario
Yes.
for kids,
I was going to bring that up. Go ahead.
and the difference was about 2.5% difference in tooth decay. Quebec is fluoridated at the moment, and at 2% of the population in Quebec is fluoridated. The government would say 4 or 5%, but the city of Three River, for example, is not fluoridating because the equipment is defective, and they're not fluoridating since about 5 years because the government doesn't have money. By the way, the government pays completely fluoridation in Quebec. All the expense, the installation, the equipment, the material, the fluoride product is all paid by the government.
Taxes.
With our taxes, and they defend it. For example, in Ottawa, they have spent $500,000 to promote fluoridation. Not in Ottawa, in Gatineau, they have spent about $500,000 to promote fluoridation, and they have lost.
$200,000 in Waterloo. $200,000 they spent, and they lost.
And they lost. So
$17,000 was our side.
And in Quebec, sometimes we spent, let's say, about $250 for a city to defend fluoridation, and normally we win.
You haven't thrown the lobbyists into the equation here either.
That's right.
The economic impact.
Yeah. Okay, just to bring you up to speed on things like financial concerns, okay? The cost of fluoridating the water supply increases the need for raising taxes. You know, we've got problems with our taxes in Ottawa. They keep going up, and fluoridation is a big part of it. Ongoing overhead expenses for providing fluoridated water increases the need for raising taxes. Fluoride has been shown to corrode water pipes, raising taxes to replace the damaged pipe. Last year, they replaced all the pipes up and down 4 of our streets where I live.
Wow.
And I'll bet you it's due to fluoride.
Especially the chemical they use in
Yes.
because it's much more acid.
So over 99% of our tax dollars are spent on fluoridating is wasted due to drinking tap water being only 1% of the total amount of water supplied. 99% of our tax money is going down the drain.
Yeah. And that's only because it's so cheap. And the reason it's so cheap is because it's a hazardous waste product that the industry wants to get rid of. If you wanted to fluoridate with pharmaceutical grade sodium fluoride, you couldn't afford to do it. And you know what you would do? No, sir. Let's assume, for sake of argument, okay, that someone convinced you that drinking a litre of fluoridated water was going to reduce tooth decay for you or your kids or whatever. Then the sensible way to do it is to make up litre bottles at 1 part per million. This way you could use pharmaceutical grade and control the chemistry, the quality of the product. Secondly, you would tell people only drink 1 litre of this a day and all the rest of the water get from the tap. And you could control the dose. And also you could control who gets it because you wouldn't give it to people that didn't want it and you wouldn't force it on people that didn't want it. So this would be the perfect way to deliver fluoride if you really believe that swallowing it was going to reduce tooth decay.
Yeah,
but they
but
don't even believe that themselves.
With the doctor's prescription.
Well,
not
that's
just
a
a drug.
prescription.
With the prescription.
They couldn't do it otherwise.
I know.
So there you go. So those responsible in Ottawa for the fluoridation are our councillors. We need to write to them, we need to phone them, we need to meet them, and we need to say, look, here's the evidence. 17 points on that sheet I gave each of you. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 more on the second page. That'll be on the website tomorrow.
If you can get me their emails, we can organise for you an online messaging system which will make it easy. One push of a button, all the...
Stuart has them.
Has he?
Yeah, Stuart has them already. Beat you to that one.
Okay, good.
So, thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure hosting you.
Is there any question?
Any more questions?
Yeah. This isn't really a question, but I know this, like from my people like my wife and people like that. They pick up a women's health magazine, or somebody might be in a doctor's office, they pick up a men's health magazine. And for some reason they believe stuff that's written in there a lot more than they believe. Like they won't come to a meeting ever, you know, if they see it in the paper they won't read it, but it's in there. You know, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I never thought about that, you know. And like I could say something to my wife every week for 10 years, and she'll pick up a magazine and all of a sudden it's, well, this is so important.
Yeah,
So
if it doesn't come from your husband, it's always better.
So there's only a few spouses who listen to their spouse.
That's right.
Mine is starting to come across slowly. Slowly. Yeah.
So it's not just me.
No.
But anyway.
But the good news is,
is it getting out in these publications?
they are beginning to get out, and we saw. I was very dissatisfied with what happened on January the 7th when the CDC said we're going to lower it from 0.7 to 1.2 to 0.7.
And that was interesting because they always say if we lower that, tooth decay will increase.
Yeah.
Just 1% reduction will be awful.
But
Then you reduce by half and say it's okay.
I must have been the only person in our whole campaign in the United States who was really absolutely fed up with that event, with the CDC, because I said all they're doing is they again restricted the discussion to teeth.
Yes.
The only health effect they're talking about is dental fluorosis. They don't think that's very important anyway. And have they really lowered it? I mean, it was 0.7 to 1.2, and they've lowered it to 0.7. Well, that was my reaction. This is a real contract. I still think it was, but it was explosive in terms of all of a sudden the people that had ignored us for years and years and years, ignored the notion that there might be something wrong with fluoridation, suddenly said, oh my God, really? They're lowering it? After 50 years, they're actually lowering it? And all of a sudden, it got the press attention. It was on the national news, CBC, NBC, ABC, all the big ones, front page of many newspapers in the United States. And a few of them actually did something which was, there may be other effects. They're lowering it because they're concerned about dental fluorosis, but maybe other effects.
In 2004, when they reduced the fluoride content in the water in Quebec, the government, the public health, did not even mention, because they knew that if they would make a reaction in the public. So this was hidden for about 2 or 3 years. And then when we have debates, then we had to reduce it 3 years ago. How come you didn't say it to anybody? How come this was hidden somewhere?
One of the big issues, which I didn't get into, but is very, very important. In November of 2006, the American Dental Association put out an e-gram to its membership.
Oh, that was important.
It's on our website.
And it said, when you're talking to parents, you should advise them not to use water with fluoride in it to make up baby formula. Because meanwhile, they'd heard the National Research Council made it very clear that bottle-fed infants are getting well over the reference dose for fluoride, number one. But again, angled towards dental fluorosis. And secondly, studies done in Iowa by Levy, one of their gods, showed it was the first year of exposure to fluoride, which was the most important year for developing dental fluorosis. So, it's interesting what happened. They sent this e-gram to all the dentists, but didn't bother to get this message to parents. And the message is parents shouldn't use fluoridated tap water to make up baby formula, but don't bother to get the message to parents. Just get it to dentists in the off chance that they might remember to tell parents.
Which they didn't do.
So one of the things that we're trying to do in the United States, and you might try to do it here, and it's certainly a fallback position in Ottawa, is ask the water department when it sends out its bills to say, if you are bottle feeding your baby using solid formula, do not use tap water to do it.
More letter writing, more emails. Another place you can write is your editor. The editor, we've only got 2 really main papers in Ottawa. It's the Ottawa Sun and the Ottawa Citizen. Write letters to the editor. Use the information on these sheets.
And even if it's not published, more they receive letters, more they feel that there's pressure from the population, so they publish 1 out of 6, for example. So if you just send 1, and if all of you only send 1, that will be already much more pressure than if they receive only 1 copy of 1 letter in a month.
Plus it will sensitize them to the issue.
And do me a favor, if you can, work in the fact that this book is available.
Yes.
Because you can't possibly cover all the arguments in this book. But for people to know that there's a backup, either the web page or this book, or your book as well, especially in Quebec. But let them know that there are resources here, that even though you're just a member of the public, quote, just a member of the public, you have backing you a whole book, whole web page, videotapes and so on.
And use only 1 point. There's always
Keep them short. 1 point at a time.
Yeah. And one thing we learned in many of these battles, it's essential that a community trying to stop fluoridation become as informed as they can, which means people really have to do their homework. They can listen to Paul, and they can listen to Gilles, and they can listen to Richard, but it's like up to you and me to understand what did they get it correct? What study? And you have to really do your homework, because at one point you might stand up and say X, Y, Z, and a counselor will come back to you and say, well, what do you mean? It's really essential to know the issue. That's what we're placed in. We have to understand the issue, and we have to own it, each of us.
One at a time.
It's the only way we're going to beat it.
Don't
It's
do too much.
education.
The worst thing you can do is to try to do too much. Focus on 1 or 2 points which you thoroughly understand, believe in, and just keep using those. Our biggest problem is we overwhelm people with too much information.
We're very sorry for that.
Yeah.
There's so much I could say, but there's very, very little time. But one of the most effective arguments against, which was not mentioned, and it really needs to be mentioned, is the effect on Alzheimer's. Now,
Yes.
every one of us
we have
here knows, but
We came in late.
no, I know, but nearly every one of us here knows somebody, a relative, a friend, whose parent, whose grandparent, aunt, has got Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And this great discovery, very little publicity, is that fluoride facilitates the assimilation of
Aluminum.
aluminum in the brain.
Yes.
And they're discovering in the brains of people without them, it's full of aluminum. And you think of a greater evidence against fluoride than that? Their
Yep.
brains full of aluminum.
There's 2 points that we always have to fight in the fluoridation, the scientific level, which is very difficult because you're always confronted with the expert of the government, and there's the legal aspect. The legal aspect could close the fluoridation overnight.
Yes.
And we have enough proof now, we have enough elements to stop fluoridation overnight, and the minute we'll be able to deposit a legal action.
But that doesn't, it's very important to do the 2 fronts.
Exactly.
Here, look at California.
I agree with you.
California now, many of the activists put their money into fighting this as a legal suit. And what happened? There's no organization in the state. People don't even know, nobody's been educating because they're putting their money and efforts into a legal suit. So, Gilles, you have to be very careful. We need to educate ourselves and our friends and our communities. And let other people who want to take the legal aspect, let's support them. But the other, our responsibility is to educate our
But
communities.
if the action is illegal, and we demonstrate it in the court overnight, it's the end of fluoridation.
But is that going to take you 20 years?
Maybe. On the
But
scientific
who's
level,
being educated then here in our community?
That's our job.
that's our job too.
Here's something that's very, very simple.
That's why we work on both sides.
Yes, yes.
If you get into specific health issues, and I could have got into many more than I did tonight. I could have gone into the bone, went into the brain, could have gone to the thyroid, pineal gland, and so on. All these issues. Most of us are not going to master those issues. But there's one fact that you need to know. That fluoridating countries are making no effort to study these issues, even when the red flags are being waved like crazy in countries which do not have fluoridation programs to protect. India, China, Japan, some of Eastern Europe. No fluoridation programs to protect. They're fully free to look at these issues. They're finding these red flags, and no attempt is being made in the fluoridating countries to check these things. Even now we've got 25 studies lowering of IQ. There's not one single attempt in Canada to look at IQ.
That's right.
And so at the very least you could say, you guys are simply not responsible. You're going to the public and saying that this thing is safe, and your country has not done the studies. Or put it another way, tell me the studies that have been done in Canada on health. Tell me the studies which have been done on health, on tissues other than the teeth in Canada.
None.
No, they haven't. Hardy Lineback did one on bone. He looked at the bones in non-fluoridated Montreal, compared them to fluoridated Toronto, and found differences. Number one.
Twice as much
There was one small study on osteosarcoma in Alberta. They compared Edmonton